The first time my family told me I was being unreasonable, we were standing in a funeral home. My mother's hand was resting on my arm, light but firm, the way she always touched me when she wanted to appear loving while steering me quietly in another direction. The room smelled like lilies and old carpet, and my father's casket sat open behind us, polished wood, gleaming under soft lights. "Not now, Evelyn," she whispered. "This isn't the time." I was 32 years old, and I had just learned that my father had died with a will no one bothered to show me. My name is Evelyn Parker. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, in a family that believed appearances were everything. We smiled in public, we argued in private, and we never ever questioned decisions made for the good of the family. I had come home from Atlanta 2 days earlier, driving through the night, when my younger brother called to tell me Dad was gone. Heart attack, he said. Sudden, peaceful. Nothing about that week felt peaceful. After the service, while relatives hugged and murmured rehearsed condolences, my uncle pulled my brother aside. Papers appeared. Quiet nods were exchanged. My mother watched it all with a tight, satisfied expression. I waited. I assumed someone would eventually come to me. No one did. That night in my childhood bedroom, I opened my laptop and searched the county probate records myself. I found the filing in less than 5 minutes. My father's estate had already been submitted. Executor Daniel Parker. Beneficiary Daniel Parker. Soul. I stared at the screen, pulse pounding in my ears. No mention of me. No shared assets. No trust. Nothing. I didn't cry. Not yet. I walked downstairs and found my mother in the kitchen folding napkins as if we were preparing for a dinner party instead of mourning a man she had been married to for 40 years. "Why am I not in the will?" I asked. She didn't look up. "Because your father wanted things simple. And I complicate things," I said. She finally met my eyes. "You left." That was the justification. I left for college. I left for work. I left to build a life that didn't revolve around their expectations. My brother Daniel arrived moments later, tie-loosened, voice calm. "Evelyn," he said, "this isn't personal." That sentence would haunt me later. "You live out of state," he continued. "Dad needed someone local to manage things, someone practical." "Manage," I repeated. "Or inherit." My mother snapped enough. I looked at them both and felt something shift. This wasn't grief. This was efficiency. They had planned this. I went back upstairs, shut the door, and sat on the edge of the bed I slept in as a teenager. That was when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Check the date on this will, and check who paid for the lawyer." My heart skipped. I didn't reply. But I did exactly what the message suggested. And what I found changed everything. Because the will wasn't just unfair. It was impossible. I didn't sleep that night. The house creaked the way old houses do when they're settling, but every sound felt deliberate, like the walls themselves were listening. I lay in my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling fan, replaying the words from the message over and over. Check the date on the will, and check who paid for the lawyer. At 6 a.m, while the rest of the house was still quiet, I opened my laptop again. The probate filing included a scanned copy of the will. I hadn't noticed it before because I was too stunned by my name missing entirely. This time I zoomed in. The signature date jumped out immediately. It was dated 3 days after my father was admitted to the hospital, 3 days after my brother told me Dad was barely conscious. I remembered that phone call clearly. Daniel's voice had been steady, almost rehearsed. "He's not really himself, Ev. The doctors say it's best not to stress him." My stomach tightened. I scrolled down to the attorney's name. Not the lawyer my parents had used for decades. Not the man who handled their property purchases, their business filings, their previous estate planning. This was someone new. A firm in Columbia I'd never heard of. I copied the name and searched it. The website was polished, professional, vague. They specialized in estate transitions and family asset protection. That phrase again, protection. By 8, the house was awake. My mother moved through the kitchen like nothing had changed, setting out coffee, speaking softly to relatives who were staying one more night. My brother avoided me entirely. I waited. After breakfast, I cornered Daniel on the back porch. "Who's the lawyer?" I asked. He stiffened. "What lawyer?" "The one Dad used for the will." He exhaled slowly, irritation flashing across his face. "Mom handled it." When I pressed, when things got bad, he said, "We didn't want to bother you." "You didn't want me there," I said. He didn't deny it. "He was sick," Evelyn Daniel snapped. "We did what we had to do." "What you had to do for who?" I asked. He looked past me toward the yard, jaw clenched. "This isn't about you." That was the second time I'd heard that sentence in 2 days, and both times it was followed by silence instead of answers. That afternoon, I drove to the hospital. I hadn't been back since the night Dad died. The hallways still smelled faintly of antiseptic and old coffee. At the nurse's station, I gave my father's name and asked as calmly as I could if I could speak to someone about his final days. A nurse in her late 40s glanced at the chart, then looked at me more carefully. "You're his daughter," she asked. "Yes." She hesitated. "One moment." She disappeared into a back room and returned with a woman wearing a badge that read, "Patient Advocacy." We sat in a small office with a single window. "Your father was under heavy medication near the end," the woman said carefully. "Pain management. Sedatives." "Was he lucid?" I asked. She chose her words. There were periods of clarity, but not consistently. "Did he meet with a lawyer?" I asked. Her eyes flicked to the chart. "Yes." My pulse quickened. "When?" She gave me the date. It matched the signature. "And who arranged that meeting?" I asked. She hesitated again. "Your brother." The word landed hard. "Was my mother present?" I asked. "Yes." I thanked her and walked out of the hospital on legs that felt unsteady. Outside, the humid South Carolina air pressed in on me, heavy and unforgiving. The message hadn't been a warning. It had been a map. That evening, another message came from the same unknown number. "You weren't supposed to notice the date. Most people don't." I stared at the screen. "Who are you?" I typed. The reply came almost immediately. Someone who watched this happen before and didn't stop it. My chest tightened. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. "Your father wasn't the first, and you won't be the last. I didn't show the messages to anyone. Not my mother, not my brother, not the relatives still drifting through the house like ghosts who had overstayed their welcome. I learned a long time ago that the moment you reveal what you know, you lose the advantage of surprise." Instead, I listened. At dinner that night, Daniel talked too much. About probate timelines, about how complicated everything was going to be, about how Dad would have wanted things handled efficiently. My mother nodded at all the right moments, her hand resting on his arm in quiet approval. They weren't grieving. They were managing. When the dishes were cleared, my mother finally turned to me with that careful tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. "We should talk about your plans," she said. "My plans?" I asked. "You can't stay here indefinitely," she continued. "You have your life in Atlanta. Translation, you don't belong here anymore." "I came for the funeral," I said evenly, "not to be dismissed." Daniel sighed. "Ev, don't make this harder than it needs to be." There it was again. Harder. Complicated. Unreasonable. Words people use when they want you to comply without asking questions. "I'm meeting with the lawyer tomorrow," I said. Daniel froze. "The lawyer," my mother repeated. "Yes," I said. "The one Dad supposedly chose." My mother's lips pressed together. "That won't be necessary." "Then you shouldn't be worried," I replied. Silence dropped like a curtain. Daniel stood abruptly. "I'll drive you," he said. "It's out of the way." "No," I said. "I'll go alone." His eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because this concerns me," I said, "and I don't need an escort." That night, I packed my suitcase carefully as if I might need to leave in a hurry. At dawn, I drove to Columbia. The law office was on the third floor of a glass building overlooking a parking garage. Clean, modern, impersonal. The receptionist smiled too quickly when I gave my father's name. "Mr. Parker's daughter," she said, "of course." She ushered me into a conference room and asked me to wait. I didn't wait long. The attorney who entered was younger than I expected. Early 40s, crisp suit, perfect posture. "Ms. Parker," he said warmly, "I'm Jonathan Reeves." I didn't return the smile. "My father signed a new will days before his death," I said. "I'd like to understand how that happened." Jonathan folded his hands. "Your father was very clear." "Clear enough to remove his daughter entirely?" I asked. He didn't blink. "Families make difficult decisions during end-of-life planning." "Did he meet with you alone?" I asked. "No," Jonathan said. "Your brother and mother were present." "Did you assess his capacity?" I pressed. "Yes," he replied smoothly. "He answered all required questions." While heavily sedated, I said. Jonathan's smile thinned. "We rely on medical clearance." "From whom?" He hesitated. "A hospital physician," he said. "Which one?" I asked. He cleared his throat. "That information is confidential." I leaned back. So is my inheritance. Jonathan studied me now, reassessing. "Ms. Parker," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "These matters are emotionally charged. It's best not to stir conflict during a sensitive time." There it was. The subtle warning. I stood. "I'll be requesting the full file, including notes, recordings, and medical clearance." Jonathan's expression hardened. "You're entitled to make requests," he said. "Whether they're productive is another matter." As I left the building, my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. Did he mention medical clearance? I didn't reply. Instead, I drove straight to the county clerk's office. I requested a copy of the medical authorization attached to the will. The clerk frowned as she reviewed the file. "That's strange," she said. "What is?" I asked. "This authorization was signed by your mother," she said, "not your father." My breath caught. She slid the document across the counter. The handwriting was unmistakable. My mother's. And in that moment, the story shifted. This wasn't about my brother inheriting everything. It was about my mother controlling the ending, and she had gone much further than I ever imagined. I sat in my car outside the clerk's office for nearly 10 minutes, staring at the copy of the authorization in my lap. My mother's signature. Not witnessed, not co-signed by my father, filed under emergency authority. She hadn't just influenced the process, she had inserted herself into it. The realization settled slowly like something heavy sinking into water. This wasn't grief-fueled chaos. It was control. I drove back to the house in silence, my hands steady on the wheel even though my thoughts were anything but. When I walked in, my mother was in the living room arranging flowers that were already beginning to wilt. "Where have you been?" she asked without looking up. "Out," I said. She glanced at my face, then set the vase down carefully. "Did you go to Columbia?" "Yes." Her shoulders stiffened just slightly. I spoke to the lawyer, I continued, and to the county clerk. She inhaled through her nose. "Evelyn, this isn't healthy." "Neither is forging authority," I said calmly. Her head snapped up. "Excuse me?" "The medical authorization," I said. "You signed it." The room went still. My mother didn't deny it. She didn't look ashamed either. "I did what had to be done," she said. "Your father was in no shape to handle paperwork." "And I wasn't even informed," I said. She crossed her arms. "You were hours away. Daniel was here." "Convenient," I replied. Her eyes flashed. "You think this was about excluding you?" "It was," I said. "But not just that. It was about making sure you stayed in charge." Her mouth tightened. "I held this family together for decades. At my expense," I said quietly. She turned away dismissive. "You always make everything personal." I almost laughed. That night, the unknown number messaged again. "You found the authorization." I typed back this time. "Who are you?" The response came slower than before. "Someone who lost more than money." My pulse quickened. "What do you want?" I asked. "To make sure this doesn't happen again." Another message followed. "Meet me tomorrow. Riverside Park, 10 in the morning." I didn't tell anyone. The next morning, I drove alone. Riverside Park was quiet, lined with old oak trees and benches worn smooth by time. A woman sat on one near the water, her posture straight, hands folded in her lap. She stood when she saw me. She was in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, well-dressed but not trying to impress anyone. "Evelyn," she said. "I'm Margaret Cole." The name hit me like a memory I hadn't realized I still carried. Cole. My father's former business partner. "I'm sorry about your father," she said. "He tried to warn me." "Warn you about what?" I asked. She gestured for me to sit. "Your mother," she said. The word hung between us. "Years ago, Margaret continued, your father and I owned a small logistics company together. Equal shares, equal say." "What happened?" I asked. "Your mother happened," she said plainly. "She convinced him I was unreliable, emotional, a risk." My stomach tightened. "She arranged meetings without me," Margaret said. "Changed documents. Pushed me out while I was dealing with my own family emergency." "Did you fight it?" I asked. Margaret smiled sadly. "I tried, but your father signed the final papers." "Under pressure," I said. She nodded. "Just like the will." I felt cold. "You're saying this pattern goes back decades," I said. "Yes," Margaret replied. "Your brother inheriting everything wasn't the plan. Your mother retaining control was." I thought of the authorization, the new lawyer, the speed. "She's done this before," I whispered. "And she'll do it again," Margaret said. "Unless someone stops her." I met her eyes. "Why come to me now?" "Because this time," she said, "there's proof. And because you're the first one who noticed." As we stood to leave, Margaret added one final sentence that changed the stakes completely. "There's another will," she said. "An earlier one. And your mother destroyed it." I felt the world tilt. "Can you prove that?" I asked. Margaret nodded slowly. I kept a copy. Margaret didn't hand me the copy right away. She watched me carefully, the way someone does when they've already been burned once and learned not to rush trust. "Before I give this to you," she said, "you need to understand what it means." I nodded. "It means my father didn't intend to cut me out." "It means more than that," she replied. "It means your mother knowingly replaced his wishes with her own." We sat back down on the bench. The river moved slowly beside us, indifferent to the fact that my understanding of my family was unraveling in real time. Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside was a photocopy of a will dated nearly 5 years earlier. I recognized my father's handwriting immediately, the way he crossed his T's, the slight slant to the right. My name was there, not as an afterthought, not reduced, but equal. A shared inheritance, shared authority, shared responsibility between Daniel and me. My throat tightened. "He signed this in my office," Margaret said. "We were finalizing some partnership matters, and he asked me to witness it." "Why didn't you submit it when he died?" I asked. She looked away. "Because your mother contacted me the same day. She told me there was a newer will, that this one had been revoked." "And you believed her," I said. "I wanted to," she admitted. "It was easier than fighting her again." I understood that too well. "When did you realize the truth?" I asked. When I saw the probate filing, she said, and when your name wasn't there. Silence settled between us, heavy but clear. This will changes everything, I said. Yes, Margaret replied, if you use it. If I repeated. She met my gaze. Evelyn, your mother doesn't retreat. She adapts. I folded the envelope carefully and slid it into my bag. So do I. That afternoon I told Daniel, not in private, in front of our mother. We were all in the living room, the same one where Dad's portrait hung above the fireplace, smiling down at a family that no longer resembled itself. There's another will, I said evenly, an earlier one. Daniel frowned. What are you talking about? One your lawyer didn't file, I continued. One Dad signed years ago. My mother's face went still. Where did you get that? She asked quietly. From someone who watched you do this before, I said. Daniel turned toward her. Mom? She didn't look at him. That document is irrelevant, she said. It was replaced. By a will you arranged while Dad was sedated, I said. Using an authorization you signed yourself. Daniel's face drained of color. You said Dad handled that. My mother finally looked at him. I protected you. From what he asked. My own sister. From losing control, I thought. I'm contesting the will, I said, using the earlier version. My mother laughed softly, sharply. You won't win. I don't need to win quietly, I said. I need the truth on record. That was when she stood. This family does not survive public shame, she said. If you do this, you destroy us. No, I replied. You did that long before I noticed. That night, the first calls came in. Relatives, friends of the family, old connections asking questions that weren't really questions. What's going on? Your mother is worried about you. This doesn't feel like you. The narrative was already being built. I forwarded everything to a lawyer in Charleston recommended by Margaret. Her name was Lillian Graves, and when she read the documents, she didn't hesitate. This isn't just a will contest, she said. This is a pattern of undue influence. What does that mean? I asked. It means, she replied, your mother has been shaping outcomes for years, and the court won't like that. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. 2 weeks for my mother to apply pressure. 2 weeks for my brother to decide where he stood. 2 weeks for the family illusion to crack completely. As I drove back to my apartment that night, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. If you go forward with this, you will regret it. I stared at the screen, then locked the phone and set it face down. For the first time since my father died, I felt something steadier than grief's certainty. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about stopping a woman who had rewritten lives by calling it love. And I wasn't stepping back. The pressure didn't come all at once. It arrived in pieces disguised as concern, wrapped in familiar voices that had known me my entire life. My aunt called first. Your mother is beside herself, she said. She hasn't been sleeping. This fight is tearing the family apart. I listened without responding. Then a cousin I barely spoke to sent a long message about forgiveness and how money changed people. A former family friend emailed to say she hoped I was taking care of my mental health during this stressful time. Mental health. That phrase again. It wasn't random. It was positioning. Lillian noticed it immediately when I forwarded her the messages. They're laying groundwork, she said. If this reaches a judge, they want you framed as emotional, reactive, unstable. So they can discredit me, I said. So they can explain away the evidence, she replied. She advised me to stop responding to anyone connected to my mother. No explanations. No defenses. Silence used correctly could be powerful. That was harder than I expected. Because silence had always been what my family demanded of me. Now it was something I chose. The first official filing from my mother's attorney arrived 3 days later. They weren't denying the earlier will existed. They were claiming my father lacked capacity when he signed it. The irony almost made me laugh. She can't have it both ways, I said, reading the motion in Lillian's office. Either he was competent then, or he wasn't competent later. Exactly, Lillian said, and that contradiction is going to matter. She leaned forward, but there's something else. She slid another document across the desk, a sworn statement from my mother. In it, she claimed my father had been confused for years, that his business decisions had suffered, that she had stepped in to protect him. And me. She wrote that I was easily influenced and prone to emotional reactions. I felt my hands tremble. She's building a narrative, I said. Yes, Lillian replied, one where she is the rational center and everyone else is unreliable. That night, Daniel came to my apartment unannounced. He looked exhausted. His tie was crooked, his eyes rimmed with red. She's going to ruin us, he said the moment I opened the door. She already has, I replied. He stepped inside and sat heavily on the couch. She says you're being manipulated, he said, that Margaret put ideas in your head. And what do you think I asked? He rubbed his face. I don't know what to think anymore. That was the first honest thing he'd said in weeks. She told me Dad was losing it, he continued, that he needed someone to take control. I believed her. Because it was easier, I said. He nodded. I didn't know about the earlier will, he said quietly. I studied him carefully. If the court reinstates it, you lose sole control. I know, he said, but I also lose her. There it was. Not money, not power. Fear of her. She's been steering this family for years, I said. You just never noticed because you were benefiting. He didn't argue. Whose side are you on? I asked. He swallowed. I don't think there are sides anymore. That answer told me everything. The next morning, Lillian called with an update. We subpoenaed the hospital records, she said, and the attorney's notes. And I asked? There are gaps, she said, missing timestamps, meetings logged without signatures. My pulse quickened. That helps us. It helps us if we can show intent, she replied, and for that we need someone on the inside. I thought of Daniel. I might have someone, I said. That afternoon, my mother called me directly for the first time since the threat. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. Evelyn, she said, we need to end this. Then tell the truth, I replied. She sighed. You don't understand the consequences. I understand them perfectly, I said. You're just not used to facing them. Her tone hardened. If you continue, you will lose this family. I closed my eyes. I lost it the moment you decided control mattered more than honesty. There was a pause. Then she said something that sent a chill through me. You think the court will protect you, she said. But courts rely on credibility, and I've been credible my whole life. The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, realizing the truth. She wasn't afraid of the law. She was confident she could bend it. And that meant the next phase wouldn't be subtle. It would be ruthless. Daniel cracked on a Wednesday afternoon. Not loudly, not dramatically. He showed up at my door with a folder tucked under his arm and a look on his face I had never seen before. Defeat. I can't do this anymore, he said the moment I let him in. I can't keep pretending I don't know what she did. I didn't speak. I waited. He set the folder on my kitchen table and slid it toward me. His hands were shaking. These are copies, he said. I took them from her safe. My chest tightened. What kind of copies? Emails, drafts, notes from meetings with the attorney, things she didn't want anyone else to see. I opened the folder slowly. My mother's email address stared back at me from the first page. Subject line, estate strategy options. I scanned the messages, my pulse pounding harder with every line. Language about timing, about leverage, about ensuring compliance. One line made my breath catch. If Evelyn resists, we emphasize instability and distance. Courts respond better to consistency than sentiment. I looked up at Daniel. She planned to discredit me. He nodded, before Dad even went into the hospital. I turned another page. A draft outline titled Contingency Plan. Bullet points followed. Reframe narrative around stress. Position Evelyn as absent. Accelerate execution window. Execution. Not a word you use lightly. She treated us like variables, I said quietly. Daniel sank into a chair. She told me it was for the family, that she was protecting us. And you believed her, I said. He nodded, because she always sounded so sure. That was her gift. Certainty delivered like love. I photographed every page, then called Lillian immediately. She arrived an hour later, read through the documents once, then again more slowly. This changes everything, she said. This shows premeditation. Daniel swallowed. What happens now? Lillian met his eyes. Now the court sees her intent. And intent is what turns influence into manipulation. He looked at me. I'll testify. I searched his face. Are you sure? He nodded. I'm done being managed. That night the first retaliation came. Not from my mother directly. From the community. A woman from church posted a vague message about children who attack their parents. Another shared an article about inheritance disputes ruining families. My name wasn't mentioned. It didn't have to be. The next morning, Lillian called early. Your mother filed an emergency motion, she said. She's requesting temporary guardianship over your father's estate retroactively. Retroactively, I repeated. She's trying to invalidate your challenge by asserting she acted as his legal protector, Lillian explained. And the court, I asked. Hearing is set for Friday. 2 days. 2 days to expose the full picture. Daniel stayed at my place that night. Around midnight, he said something quietly like he wasn't sure he should. There's something else, he said. I looked at him. What? She didn't just do this with Dad, he said. She did it with my first marriage. My heart skipped. What do you mean? He swallowed. When Laura and I divorced, she coordinated with my lawyer, pushed for terms that kept assets consolidated, told me Laura was unstable. A familiar word. She told me it was to protect me, he said. I never questioned it. I sat back slowly, the pattern finally complete. This wasn't a one-time act. This was her method. And I was the first one to pull it into the light. Friday came fast. The courtroom felt different this time. Heavier. My mother sat at the defense table, composed, elegant, confident. When Daniel took the stand, she didn't look at him. He testified clearly, calmly, about the emails, the drafts, the instructions. When the judge reviewed the evidence, his expression changed. Not shocked. Concerned. This court is troubled, he said, by what appears to be a coordinated effort to control estate outcomes through undue influence. My mother's attorney objected. The judge overruled him. When my mother finally spoke, her voice was steady. "I was acting as a wife," she said, "as a mother, as a protector." The judge looked at her for a long moment. "Protection does not include deception," he said. The emergency motion was denied. The earlier will was admitted into evidence, and the case was set for full trial. Outside the courthouse, my mother finally looked at me. Her eyes were cold. "You think this ends well for you," she said. I met her gaze without flinching. "It ends honestly," I replied. That night as I lay awake, I understood something with startling clarity. She had lost control of the story, and for someone like her, that was the beginning of the end. The trial began on a Monday morning that felt too quiet for what it carried. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No dramatic benches, no sweeping balconies, just rows of wooden seats worn smooth by decades of other families who had once believed their private conflicts would stay private. They never do. My mother arrived precisely on time, dressed in a tailored navy suit, hair immaculate, posture flawless. She looked like someone accustomed to being believed. I felt Daniel shift beside me. "She's never lost," he whispered. "Everyone loses eventually," I said. The judge entered. Proceedings began. Lillian opened with restraint. No emotion, no accusations that couldn't be proven. "This case," she said, "is not about grief or misunderstanding. It is about control, about a sustained pattern of influence designed to override consent." My mother's attorney stood immediately after. He spoke of devotion, of a wife managing chaos, of a daughter who lived far away and didn't understand the daily realities. I listened without reacting. Then the witnesses began. Hospital staff testified first. A nurse confirmed my father had been heavily medicated on the day the new will was signed. A physician admitted that capacity had been assumed, not assessed. Then the attorney from Columbia took the stand. Jonathan Reeves looked less confident now. His answers were careful, polished. Until Lillian presented the emails. The room shifted. Reeves admitted receiving strategic guidance from my mother, claimed it was common for family members to coordinate. Lillian leaned forward. "Is it common to pre-draft responses anticipating resistance from beneficiaries?" He hesitated. "No," he said quietly. The judge made a note. Then came the surprise witness, Margaret Cole. When she entered the courtroom, my mother stiffened for the first time. Margaret spoke calmly about her partnership with my father, about meetings she had attended, about the earlier will. She produced the original. The ink was faded but intact. The signatures matched. My mother's attorney objected repeatedly. The judge allowed it. Then Margaret said something that made the room go silent. "Your Honor," she said, "Mrs. Parker attempted to buy this copy from me." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. My mother stood. "That's a lie." Margaret didn't raise her voice. "You offered me money to destroy it." The judge looked directly at my mother. "Is that true?" She hesitated. "Just long enough." The judge ordered a recess. In the hallway, reporters gathered. Whispers followed us like static. Daniel leaned against the wall, pale. She really thought she could erase it. "She thought no one would stand," I said. When court resumed, the tone had changed. The judge addressed my mother directly. "This court has seen enough to be deeply concerned," he said. "What was presented as care increasingly resembles coercion." My mother's composure cracked. "Everything I did was for my family," she said sharply. "For yourself," the judge corrected. By the end of the day, the court issued a preliminary ruling. The later will was suspended. The earlier will was reinstated pending final judgment. My name was back where it had always belonged. But as we left the courthouse, I realized something important. This wasn't over. Not yet. Because my mother wasn't done fighting. And the most dangerous people are the ones who believe losing control is worse than losing everything. The fallout didn't wait for a verdict. By the next morning, the story had escaped the courtroom and found its way into every quiet space my mother once ruled. Church, garden club, the charity board she chaired for over a decade. People didn't call to accuse. They called to ask careful questions, the kind that sound polite but carry distance underneath. "Is everything okay? I heard something troubling. I hope this is all a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding was her favorite word. But it didn't fit anymore. Daniel stopped answering his phone entirely. He stayed in my apartment, sleeping on the couch, moving like someone who had finally stepped out of a long shadow and didn't know how to stand in the light. "She's calling everyone," he said one night, trying to frame this as elder abuse, as betrayal. "That's because she only knows one defense," I replied. "Control the story." 2 days later, Lillian called with urgency in her voice. "We've received a request for sealed testimony," she said, "from someone connected to your mother's past." My chest tightened. "Who?" "A woman named Helen Morris," Lillian replied. "She was your mother's sister-in-law, married to your Uncle Robert." I hadn't heard that name in years. Robert had died when I was a teenager. Officially, it was a stroke. Sudden, tragic. We attended the funeral, sent flowers, and never spoke of him again. Helen wants to testify, Lillian continued, but she's afraid. Of my mother, I asked. Yes. The hearing was scheduled for the following afternoon. Helen entered the courtroom slowly, shoulders hunched, hands clenched in front of her like she was bracing for impact. She looked older than I remembered, worn in a way that time alone couldn't explain. She avoided my mother's eyes completely. When she began to speak, her voice shook. I stayed quiet for years, she said, because it was easier. She described her marriage, how Robert's finances changed suddenly, how decisions were made without her knowledge, how documents appeared already signed. My stomach tightened with every familiar detail. And when I questioned it, Helen continued, I was told I was emotional, unstable, that I needed rest. The judge leaned forward. What happened to your husband, he asked. Helen swallowed. He had a stroke. But before that, he had been meeting privately with his sister. My mother shifted in her seat. Helen's voice steadied. After Robert died, I was pressured to settle quickly, to sign, to move on. She looked up, then eyes finally locking with my mother's. You told me it was for the family, Helen said. You told me I'd ruin everything if I fought. The courtroom was silent. Lillian stood. Did you receive compensation in exchange for your silence? Helen nodded, yes. My breath caught. The judge asked quietly, do you have proofs? Helen reached into her bag and produced an envelope. Inside were copies of wire transfers, settlement agreements, emails written in my mother's unmistakable tone. This wasn't just influence. It was purchase. My mother stood abruptly. This is irrelevant, she snapped. Ancient history. The judge didn't raise his voice. No, he said, it's context. I watched my mother then, not as her daughter, but as a woman seeing another woman's mask fall completely. She wasn't angry. She was exposed. After court, Helen approached me in the hallway. I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner, she said softly. I shook my head. You spoke when it mattered. That night, Daniel sat beside me in silence for a long time. She didn't just control us, he said finally. She trained us. I nodded, because the truth was no longer just legal. It was generational. And stopping it meant more than winning a case. It meant breaking a pattern that had survived on fear and obedience for decades. The final ruling was coming. And with it, the end of a story my mother had rewritten for far too long. The courtroom was full again, but it felt different this time. Quieter, heavier. No whispers, no nervous shifting. Just the sound of papers being arranged and the low hum of people bracing for something irreversible. My mother sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, eyes forward. If you didn't know her, you might have mistaken her for calm. I knew better. Daniel sat beside me. His shoulders slumped, the weight of everything finally visible in his posture. He hadn't spoken much since Helen's testimony. Some realizations don't come with words. They come with grief. The judge entered. No preamble, no softening. I have reviewed all testimony documents and supplemental filings, he said. This court is prepared to rule. My pulse pounded in my ears. The later will, the judge continued, is hereby declared invalid due to undue influence, lack of proper capacity assessment, and procedural misconduct. A breath left my chest I didn't realize I'd been holding. The earlier will, he said, is reinstated in full. My name echoed in my mind, not spoken aloud but present again where it had been erased. But the judge wasn't finished. This court also finds a demonstrable pattern of coercive control exercised by Mrs. Parker over multiple individuals across decades, he said, looking directly at my mother. While this court rules only on the matter before it, the evidence presented has been referred for further civil review. Further review. A quiet phrase with sharp consequences. My mother's attorney whispered urgently in her ear. She didn't respond. The judge concluded, this matter is adjourned. The gavel fell. Just like that, the story she had written for all of us was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered, but Lillian guided us away quickly. I didn't want microphones. I didn't want sound bites. I wanted air. Daniel stopped on the steps. She's alone now, he said, not with satisfaction, but with something like disbelief. I looked back once. My mother stood near the entrance, untouched by the crowd, suddenly small in a way I had never seen before. Not powerful, not commanding. Just exposed. She chose that, I said. That afternoon, Daniel packed his things and left my apartment. He didn't know where he was going yet, only that it couldn't be back into her orbit. I need to learn how to make decisions without asking permission, he said. I hugged him. It felt unfamiliar, necessary. That evening, my phone rang. My mother's name. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was short. You think you've won, she said, but you've destroyed this family. I didn't call her back, because the truth had finally settled clear and unmovable. Families don't break when control is challenged. They break when control replaces love. And I wasn't responsible for repairing what had been built on fear. There was only one chapter left now. Not hers. Mine. The quiet after the ruling felt unnatural. For weeks, my life had been measured in deadlines, filings, testimony, and the constant vigilance of knowing every word could be used to twist a narrative. When it stopped, when there was nothing left to prepare for the silence, pressed in harder than the noise ever had. I returned to Atlanta 2 days later. My apartment smelled faintly stale, like it had been waiting for me without knowing whether I'd come back the same person. I set my suitcase down and stood in the middle of the living room, unsure what to do next. Winning doesn't come with instructions. Lillian called that evening. The estate transfer will take some time, she said, but legally it's settled. You're protected. Protected. The word sounded foreign. And your mother, I asked? There will likely be follow-up civil actions, Lillian replied carefully. People she dealt with before are paying attention now. I thanked her and hung up, feeling something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was still tight. Daniel called the next morning. I moved into a short-term rental, he said, just until I figure things out. How are you holding up? I asked. He laughed quietly, like someone who just realized his entire compass was broken. I understood that too well. I don't expect forgiveness, he added, but I wanted you to know I'm trying to do this differently. I know, I said. That's enough for now. We sat in silence on the line for a moment before hanging up. It wasn't closure. It was space. And space, I was learning, mattered. The hardest part came later that week. I visited my father's grave alone. The cemetery was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't judge. I knelt and brushed away a few fallen leaves from the stone, tracing his name with my fingers. I didn't do this to punish her, I said out loud. I did it because I couldn't let her rewrite you. I didn't know if he would have been proud, or disappointed, or conflicted. I only knew I had told the truth. And that had to be enough. Back in my daily life, things shifted subtly. Friends spoke to me differently, with more care, more respect, less assumption. I noticed it at work, too. I stopped apologizing before I spoke, stopped softening my opinions to keep rooms comfortable. When someone tried to talk over me in a meeting, I didn't retreat. I waited, and then I continued. Power, I realized, isn't loud. It's refusal. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a single page written in my mother's careful handwriting. I hope you're satisfied. You took everything. I folded the letter once and set it aside, because for the first time I knew the truth. I hadn't taken anything from her. I had taken myself back. Freedom didn't arrive all at once. It came in moments so small I almost missed them. The first was when I realized I no longer checked my phone before speaking. I didn't rehearse explanations in my head. I didn't anticipate how someone might twist my words before I said them. The second was when I stopped feeling the urge to defend myself to people who had already chosen not to understand me. That urge had ruled my life for years. It was gone. I finalized the estate paperwork in late spring. The process was quiet, procedural, almost anticlimactic. No speeches, no apologies, just signatures and confirmations. I donated part of my inheritance to a legal fund that supported women contesting coercive estate abuse. Not as a gesture of revenge, but as an acknowledgement. I wasn't unique. I was just the one who refused to stay quiet. Daniel and I spoke occasionally, carefully, without expectations. He was learning how to live without asking permission, and I was learning how to let him do that without carrying responsibility for his growth. We were siblings again, different, wiser, scarred but honest. My mother never reached out again. I heard through distant channels that she withdrew from most public roles, that people who once deferred to her now spoke cautiously politely at arm's length. Control loses its power the moment people stop feeding it. I thought I would feel satisfaction. What I felt instead was relief. Relief that I no longer had to carry a role that was never mine. Relief that I could remember my father without the distortion of her narrative. Relief that I could finally hear my own voice clearly. On a quiet Sunday morning months later, I sat on my balcony with a cup of coffee and watched the city wake up. No agenda, no urgency. Just presence. That's when I understood the real ending of this story. Revenge isn't loud. It isn't cruel. It doesn't require punishment. Real revenge is living without permission from the people who tried to control you. It's choosing clarity over comfort, truth over approval, and yourself over silence. If you're listening to this and something in your life feels wrong in a way you can't quite explain, trust that instinct. Patterns reveal themselves when you stop looking away. You're not imagining it, and you're not weak for seeing it. You're strong enough to name it. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it resonated with you, take a moment to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about truth, justice, and reclaiming your life. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop shrinking, and that's where everything begins.